The attacks on Tesla are now being seriously investigated. Now, the FBI has reportedly launched a special task force specifically looking into this and also looking into an anarchist group that are involved in the alleged attacks. Also, in other news, the DHS has now revoked the legal protections of yet another wave of illegal immigrants. That's about 530,000 people who are on a migrant parole list. And meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party has unveiled a new weapon, a specialized tool for cutting undersea cables. They claim they weren't doing it. It turns out they built a tool specifically to do it. And also on the topic of China, there's a pressure campaign to try to bring an end to the U.S. House Select Committee on the competition with the Chinese Communist Party. And it's now being revealed that many of the organizations behind that campaign are actually tied to the CCP. I'll be talking about these topics and more today, so let's get started. Now, first off, the attacks on Tesla, they're being taken pretty seriously. The FBI has now launched a special task force looking into the different groups behind it, including an anarchist organization that's involved in these attacks. Now, this follows public comments from President Donald Trump and recent arrests by the Justice Department and could now be aimed at organizations behind the incidents. The groups pulling the strings, in other words. New York Post said this. It said the FBI launched a task force Monday to try to nail the criminals setting fire to Tesla vehicles and charging stations, calling the acts domestic terrorism and eyeing an anarchy blog calling for more. It notes the Bureau has received reports of 48 instances so far this month related to Tesla vehicles, dealerships, and charging stations, and is investigating at least 7 of them in conjunction with local law enforcement, the Post has learned. Now, it says the agency's newly formed 10-person task force will deploy ATF, right? That's your firearms tobacco group, right? ATF personnel, special agents and intelligence analysts from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives and the Treasury Department, and personnel from the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, including its Domestic Terrorism Operations Section and Weapons of Mass Destruction. Again, they're using firebombs and such. Now, notes that ATF has also embedded personnel in FBI field offices, starting with San Antonio, Texas, where some of the Molotov cocktail attacks have been carried out. And further, it notes the Bureau, the FBI, also was looking into an anarchist blog being run out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and tracking a mass protest called Tesla Takedown, scheduled from March 29th, calling for 500 demonstrations at Tesla showrooms and charging stations. Who's behind it? Who's organizing it? Someone is. We may find out soon. And it says, in addition, the FBI identified the site DogeQ, S.st, that has information doxing Tesla employees and locations across the country and being run out of the African country of Sao Tome. Foreign operation running some of this. Now, FBI Director Kash Patel, he actually responded to that story from the New York Post, and it seemed like he confirmed that they've now formed this task force looking into it. He also referred to the attacks as domestic terrorism again. He wrote an X quote, "The FBI has been investigating the increase in violent activity toward Tesla, and over the last few days we have taken additional steps to crack down and coordinate our response. This is domestic terrorism. Those responsible will be pursued, caught, and brought to justice." Now, again, they've been saying this for a bit now. They're going to be looking into it. Normally, criminal investigations, they take a while, sometimes 6 months, sometimes a year, sometimes longer than that. Already, they've made 3 arrests. That was pretty quick also. We'll see what happens from here. Now, in other news, the IRS is allegedly working to deal with ICE, and they want to help locate illegal immigrants. Daily Wire wrote that the IRS may soon use its taxpayer database to help Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, locate illegal aliens for deportation. The tax agency, it says, is close to an agreement with ICE for agents to cross-check key information on aliens with the taxpayer database, such as the home addresses. And this is notably the information that certain individuals do not want them to get. They don't want them to be able to cross-reference this stuff, because as soon as you cross-reference databases, sharing information between 2 different agencies, while they say you can't do that, it's a violation of the privacy of these individuals, But you need to do that in order to see if something is legitimate or not. And it seems like they're going to do it. Now, notes the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, which oversees ICE, would not have direct access to IRS systems, which again is where the legal complications are. But it said it would be able to verify information with IRS agents. This is according to New York Times. And it notes the Trump administration has tried before to tap into the IRS's extensive servers to aid in alien deportations. The IRS has resisted such plans over risks of sensitive taxpayer information and concerns of violating federal law. Again, it's sensitive if you let law enforcement just access the private information of every individual in the country. What they can do instead is cross-reference their data with IRS data. Was this illegal immigrant stealing someone's identity? Was this illegal immigrant violating some other law using, this tax system? Were they illegally working in the country? How were they doing it? Well, this could reveal it. Now, notice the new agreement would be a breakthrough for the administration towards its goal of surging deportations, kicking them out, right? And it says, while the IRS typically keeps taxpayer information away from other agencies, because again, that's all of our private information, it says the IRS does share information with law enforcement on a limited basis. You need a warrant if you want to get someone's information, and that's to protect all of us, right? Now, it notes that such information sharing typically comes after a court order, according to the Washington Post, and it notes many illegal aliens working in the United States file taxes to the IRS. How do they do it? Well, they steal people's identities, how they do it. But it says it's a practice the agency has actually encouraged. Now, it notes as well, the IRS has a special 9-digit code for workers without a social security number called an individual taxpayer identification number. And illegal immigrants' filings contain a slew of personal information, such as home addresses, employer names, and income. And that personal information they were using to file taxes could be used to find them and deport them. Now, look, this could potentially get into a lot of other issues. There's the issue that many illegal immigrants do, in fact, steal people's identities. This is common if you come to New York City, go to AOC's district, Jackson Heights. I used to live there. You can see people selling it on the street corners. It's in the open, it's normal here, and it's relatively not even punished. This happens in broad daylight alongside prostitution and people walking into stores, robbing the stores, and then selling the things they stole from the stores literally in front of the stores. Walk down Jackson Heights and you'll see it firsthand. Identity theft, other forms of petty crime are relatively accepted in some of these neighborhoods, in New York at least. Now, there have been stories, for example, of some of these gang members, MS-13, Trende Aragua, others, there's a lot of them, that even openly do this on street corners, selling people's private information. And part of the way this works is you can buy a fake green card. You can buy a fake social security number. You can steal somebody's identity and start getting on the gravy train of social programs if you're not already on it. Because remember, individuals under the parole system, they could kind of get it, right? They were able to get that and a whole lot more. Individuals who are not on that parole system, like actual, what we would consider conventional illegal immigrants, they're not able to unless they engage in identity theft. And so there's a big market selling that. Some businesses, like for example, the big construction jobs in New York, they will also require you to have, for example, have work papers, social security numbers, those things. Yes, there are ways around this, which according to this article, the IRS has encouraged them to take. You could argue that's because they avoid stealing people's identities. Maybe that's the preferable way. But this is also a semi-legal way for illegal immigrants to illegally work, which is a bit of an odd space, right? It's a legal pathway to do something illegal. And is that legal? I don't know. But the other issue is if immigration enforcement is able to get that data, they then get the names, phone numbers, information, home addresses of people who've been illegally working in this country. And if they can get that, well, it sends two messages. One is, well, to people illegally working who've taken this semi-legal route of working illegally. Yeah, that's how it works. it means that they will now be discouraged from doing it. They might just engage in identity theft, or they might work under the table, meaning less money for the IRS, meaning less money for the government, meaning, of course, that maybe that's a bad thing. The other side is, well, these people have been committing crimes, illegally working and so on. Yes, there's a semi-legal pathway for them to do it, which is a bit odd in itself, but maybe that shouldn't be there in the first place, because why are you letting people violate the law? That's the kind of weird gray area this is in. And then there's, of course, the issue of, well, do you have a warrant to actually get people's private information, which is the legal difficulty this whole thing is going to face. Now, we'll see, of course. Now, folks, on to another topic. The DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has revoked legal protections on yet another wave of illegal immigrants. The Guardian said the Department of Homeland Security said on Friday it would revoke the temporary legal status of more than 530,000 Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. And they were welcomed into the U.S. under the Biden-era sponsorship process, according to a notice posted to the Federal Register and signed by the Homeland Security Chief, Kristi Noem. Basically, the way it was working is that existing illegal immigrants could sponsor other illegal immigrants and bring them into the country, get them on the gravy train. Again, these people were on the parole system. The parole system opens the door for social welfare, free houses, free food, the whole 9 yards. So this is this is the actual semi-legal status that they were given. Now, the issue that's being uncovered, according to many allegations coming out, is the sponsorship program oftentimes involved illegal immigrants sponsoring other illegal immigrants who they didn't even know. They were even establishing shops, and these shops were effectively working as human traffickers. And rather than saying, hey, we're human traffickers, they said, hey, we are sponsoring illegal immigrants who are paying our human traffickers. And so this was a very legally gray area operation in and of itself. Now look, it says the order cut short of a 2-year parole program known as CHNV under Joe Biden that allowed 532,000 people who had arrived in the U.S. since October 2022 with financial sponsors to obtain 2-year work permits and live and work in the U.S. The other problem you have with those financial sponsors is sometimes it was slave labor. Hey, financial sponsor to come and work in my sweatshop, right? Now, notes that Noem's notice said they will lose their legal status on the 24th of April, coming up very soon. Now, it notes the new policy affects people who are already in the U.S. and who came under the humanitarian parole program, as they refer to it. It follows an earlier Trump administration decision to end what it called the broad abuse of the humanitarian parole, a long-standing legal tool presidents have used to allow people from other countries where there is war or political instability to enter the country and temporarily live in the U.S. The problem we had with it is that many have argued, at least on the Trump side, that it was being significantly abused. It was being used in ways it was never used before, but it's a semi-legal pathway that is now being re-examined. Now it notes, under the new policy, parolees must depart before their parole termination date if they have no lawful basis to stay in the U.S. And it says, quote, parole is inherently temporary and parole alone is not an underlying basis for obtaining any immigration status, DHS said. Now, again, this parole system was a gray area tactic. It gave illegal immigrants semi-legal status, and this is what's different when you get into the debate of, are they illegal aliens? Are they aliens? Are they migrants? It depends on the status, and it depends on how you interpret the law. Individuals coming in through this system where they were sponsored by people already here, this is kind of the chain migration issue you had. This granted semi-legal status to individuals who were technically just illegal immigrants, but because it was semi-legal status, they were technically migrants and were able to get social benefits and so on. The problem, as I briefly mentioned, was that the way this system works, some of these people who were sponsoring others were actual human traffickers. Some of the people sponsoring others were engaged in slave labor. Some of the people sponsoring others had set up like chop shops, basically, where they were running human trafficking businesses using this as semi-legal cover. But the problem is because what was an existing system that did have its purpose was expanded almost without limits and not really properly, regulated, was able to be used on just a massive scale. And when you deal with massive scales like that, you're going to have a lot of legitimate cases and you're going to have a lot of illegitimate cases. It seems the Trump administration is facing the problem that the issue is so broad that they don't even have the court system that could possibly handle or re-examine a lot of these cases. What they're basically telling a lot of the immigrants right now, and illegal immigrants, is self-deport because we don't have the capacity to view your case. Self-deport or you will be a criminal, but if you self-deport, you can have a legal pathway back into the country once we're able to properly review things, and once we get the legal system back, functioning again, and you don't have a wait line of like 10 years, because there's no way the migrant court system could ever possibly view all the cases right now. Now, folks, in addition to this, the United States Navy is getting involved in border security, and even more so. The U.S. Navy has now sent additional warships to help stop illegal immigrants and drug traffickers at the southern border. New York Post said this. It said the Navy on Saturday announced another destroyer. We assume they're not going to be launching like military barrages, but it's a destroyer sent to the southern border to aid in the ongoing maritime efforts to curb illegal immigration and drug smuggling. If you're a drug smuggler and you see a Navy destroyer, you probably don't want to mess with it. And notes Navy officials said the USS Spruance, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer against little drug traffickers, departed Naval Base San Diego Saturday to support southern border operations. And it says the goal of the mission is to restore territorial integrity at the U.S. southern border, according to a statement from the Navy. Now, Trump also weighed in on why he says this is necessary, and he said this on Truth Social, quote, he said the 14th Amendment right of American citizens never had anything to do with modern-day gate crashers, illegal immigrants who break the law by being in our country. He said it had everything to do with giving citizenship to former slaves. He's talking about, of course, the policies of taking back citizenship from people who were using chain migration, who were coming here and having a birthright citizenship. Trump is talking about basically ending the policies that have been abused. The policies that were put in place to, in this case, give citizenship to former slaves, but has now worked for a mass citizenship program for kind of what's becoming the largest population of the United States. Now, Trump said he's talking about ending birthright citizenship. It's not clear whether that will also include stripping citizenship of people who are the children of illegal immigrants. That has not been mentioned, although some people fear that might happen. But Trump, at the very least, is looking to end it going forward, and we assume that's all he's talking about. But he said this. He said, our founding fathers are spinning in their graves at the idea that our country can be taken away from us. No nation in the world has anything like this, birthright citizenship. He said, our lawyers and judges have to be tough and protect America. And so, in other words, mass operations looking to secure the U.S. southern border and to carry out or facilitate mass deportations, and also end some of the policies that have been used to basically encourage this. Now, in some other news, President Donald Trump is putting additional pressure on Venezuela. And this is important because this relates to the Alien Enemies Act and also other problems right now. Trump wrote this on Truth Social. He said, President Donald J. Trump announced today that the United States of America will be putting what is known as a secondary tariff on the country of Venezuela for numerous reasons, including the fact, he says, that Venezuela has purposefully and deceitfully sent to the United States undercover tens of thousands of high-level and other criminals, many of whom are murderers, and people of a very violent nature. Among the gangs they sent to the United States is Tren de Aragua, which has been given the designation of foreign terrorist organization. And he notes we are in the process of returning them to Venezuela or El Salvador. And he says it is a big task. In addition, Venezuela has been very hostile to the United States and the freedoms which we espouse. Therefore, any country, this is big, any country that purchases oil and or gas from Venezuela will be forced to pay a tariff of 25% to the United States on any trade they do with our country. And you know why that's a problem for a lot of countries? The biggest importer of gas from Venezuela is China. Russia and China have a heavy footprint in Venezuela. The two of them effectively built a lot of the infrastructure in Venezuela, in fact. A lot of the Venezuelan industry and infrastructure was built by the CCP through the Belt and Road Initiative. Debt traps, and because they were debt traps, a lot of it is controlled by the CCP. It's actually one of the reasons why and aside from terrible socialist policies, one of the big reasons why the Venezuelan economy failed. They're in all these debt traps with China. So if Trump does this, if Venezuela continues to trade with China, this will very deeply, in addition to the existing tariffs, really deeply harm the Chinese economy. Meaning the CCP, unless they get off that train, which they probably won't, this will make it very difficult for them. But Trump adds, quote, "All documentation will be signed and registered, and the tariff will take place on April 2nd, 2025, very soon." He says, "Liberation Day in America. Please let this notification serve to represent that the Department of Homeland Security, Border Patrol, and all other law enforcement agencies within our country have been so notified. Thank you for your attention to this matter." Now look, aside from the tariffs and the effect this is probably going to have on kind of the alternate world economy. Remember, there's the surface world economy, there's the United States and Europe and Canada, and the former, you call them the Five Eyes states, or the former Commonwealth, which the United States may rejoin, by the way. You have these kind of first world economies, and they they run a lot of the humanitarian stuff. They have a lot of the surface world business. Then there's the countries that are kind of on the naughty list. These are the guys that have been maybe sanctioned by the United States, talking North Korea, Iran, Russia, until maybe that's changing now, Venezuela, and a lot of other kind of countries that engage in serious enough human rights abuses that they cannot trade with many first world countries. They've been sanctioned. What happens? The Chinese Communist Party built an alternative world economy and has, to an extent, nullified the effects of a lot of U.S. sanctions by establishing alternate trade systems with these countries. That's why, of course, North Korea, Russia, Iran, they kind of depend on the CCP's alternate world economy. Trump is offering some of them a way out, in particular Russia, but by doing this to Venezuela, which is part of that alternate world economy, very heavily alongside Cuba, to an extent Brazil because of the current leader, Venezuela now, main economy, oil exports, energy exports, and some domestic industry, which China basically runs. This will very much harm the CCP and maybe cause a lot of countries, including Russia, that are looking to make some deals with the United States, maybe also distance from Venezuela, meaning this will tank the Venezuelan economy even further. This could collapse Venezuela. Now, that would, to an extent, that was already on the table. Even under the Biden administration, he had given some signs that maybe there were going to be protests and color revolutions. Shortly before leaving office, President Joe Biden, at the time, he actually met with the opposition leader of Venezuela, who's currently taking refuge in Spain. Biden, the administration, recognized the opposition in Spain, again a Venezuelan living there, as being the official winner of the Venezuelan elections, and he deemed Maduro, the current head in Venezuela, as the illegitimate leader. That was Biden. Biden also talked about mass protests against the Maduro regime, and Biden also put sanctions on many Venezuelan leaders, including Maduro, saying that basically the leadership is a criminal cartel. The Biden administration alleged they're tied in with the Cartel de los Sols. And Trump is now using that as part of his policies to invoke the Alien Enemies Act against Tren de Aragua, because Tren de Aragua, he alleges, works very close with the Venezuelan regime and also with the Cartel de los Sols, which works, again, according to the Biden administration, the Venezuelan regime. Now, this is important because the role of Venezuela in mass illegal immigration is a big thing, and it ties in with the gang Tren de Aragua. This is all key here. This is a key part of Trump invoking the Alien Enemies Act. To declare that, you need to say you're under an invasion or you're in a war with another country. Trump is using both of these. He's saying we're in a terror war. He has designated Tren de Aragua a terrorist organization. He says we're being invaded by them. And he's saying the foreign war or invasion is being done by Venezuela. The complication here is we have not declared a war against Venezuela. We've declared a war on terrorism. That's been in place since 9/11. But we're not at war with a foreign country. The technicality of the Alien Enemies Act is you can invoke it if you're under invasion by another country. And Trump is alleging that because of the ties between Tren de Aragua, the Cartel de los Sols, and how that relates to the Venezuelan regime, you can say that this is a facilitated invasion and it's coordinated because of the relationship between the cartels and because of the government relationship of those cartels. Now, on this, of course, ironically, this is going to become one of the big legal debates as well, because Trump is trying to now defend this in court. It's being blocked, and he needs to prove the legalities of this whole policy. We'll see how that unfolds. Now, CNN has given more details as well in Trump's new tariffs with Venezuela and why this matters. It said President Donald Trump said Monday that he will impose tariffs of up to 25% on any nation that purchases oil and energy from Venezuela. It notes this news comes after reports that Trump is set to delay prior tariffs he announced, including charging 25% imports of pharmaceuticals, cars, and lumber. Those tariffs were set to go into effect on April 2nd. The same day, Trump said he'll announce a number of reciprocal tariffs on other nations, a day he refers to as Liberation Day. April 2nd, folks, Liberation Day, according to Trump. Now, it says he pledged Monday to enact the 25% tariffs on countries purchasing oil from Venezuela on that same day. And Venezuela was one of the top foreign suppliers of oil to the United States as well last year, according to Commerce Department trade data, which is a very odd trade of the United States. We can basically deem the leadership of a country illegitimate. We can say they're running terrorist operations. We can say we're under invasion by them. And then we can still basically prop up their economy with foreign trade. A very strange habit we have as a nation, by the way. In other news, folks, speaking of this, right? Speaking of rogue nations that are at war with us but we trade with, the Chinese Communist Party has now unveiled a brand new weapon. The CCP built a specialized tool for cutting undersea cables, meaning they can sever the cables and cut the internet off to entire countries. Something that's kind of like at the front line of modern warfare, something they're doing to Taiwan very aggressively, and something they were denying they were doing until now. And not only, it turns out, were they doing it, but they built a tool specifically to do it. Bloomberg said this. It said China revealed for the first time that it has developed a compact deep-sea cable-cutting device that is powerful enough to sever communication lines. Presumably, they could also use it to sever gas pipelines and so on too. And now this was reported by the South China Morning Post, which, by the way, used to be semi-independent, based in Hong Kong. The CCP took it over. It was bought up by Alibaba and then fell into the hands of the CCP after the CCP outed the head of Alibaba, again, former owner Jack Ma. This is basically CCP state-run media now. But it notes the tool is able to operate at a depth of up to 4,000 meters, that's 13,123 feet, and has been designed for use with the country's advanced manned or unmanned submersible vehicles, meaning these submarines, which don't necessarily need a crew, the report said, citing a peer-reviewed paper published in the Chinese-language journal Mechanical Engineer on February 24th. By the way, if the CCP releases anything, it's intentional. This is just the way they operate. If you have the media in China able to report something, it's because the CCP let them report it. If you have a Chinese journal, it's because the CCP allowed them to publish it. Nothing is said in an official publication in China without the go-ahead of the Chinese Communist Party, meaning this is approved messaging. It notes this. Subsea cables have emerged as a key vulnerability facing governments around the world in the event of heightened tensions or outright conflict. you can basically eliminate the infrastructure of a nation. And that infrastructure is needed to maintain the factories, maintain the economy, maintain electricity, maintain production. You shut that off, you turn the lights off, you turn the radios off, you blind them, and you cripple them, and then you invade them. That is modern warfare. Now look, this follows a string of other incidents where undersea cables were mysteriously getting cut. The United States and other countries are saying, gee, how did this undersea cable get cut? They launched investigations, and they started finding a very strange pattern. They'd say, hey, an undersea cable was cut, and then they'd find that a Chinese ship was sailing zigzag across the area where it was cut. Meaning they were like wondering, well, gee, it looks like this Chinese ship cut it. When they investigated, the Chinese ship would often say, we have no idea how it was cut. They're like, well, why are you sailing zigzag? That makes no logical sense unless you were trying to cut it. The suspicion at first was that these ships were dragging their anchors, right? Oh, we just forgot to pull the anchor up. We were not intentionally doing this. We merely left the anchor down and then sailed zigzag because we didn't know what was going on. We didn't check to see if our anchor was down. It turns out they were doing it intentionally. And the Chinese Communist Party is now just openly saying not only were they doing it, they built a tool to do it more efficiently. Now, look, this is kind of like the on-Earth version of anti-satellite warfare, which they also do. It's the ability to blind and deafen your adversaries, cripple them as a precursor for war. And of course, right now, one of the big allegations, focuses of this, is Taiwan. The CCP is surrounding Taiwan. The CCP is severing the undersea cables of Taiwan. And there are a lot of concerns that right now they've set the stage to invade Taiwan. We'll see if it happens. But like on another topic related to China, there's a pressure campaign right now targeted at the U.S. government, in particular the House of Representatives. There's a mysterious campaign. Let's discuss it. There's a campaign suddenly, it looks like it's grassroots run, turns out it's not, but it's trying to bring an end, to close the House Select Committee on the competition with the Chinese Communist Party. Someone is trying to shut it down. And it's now being revealed that many of these grassroots Chinese organizations saying, you know, investigating China is discrimination. It turns out many of the organizations behind this campaign are, guess what, tied to the Chinese Communist Party, meaning many of them are front organizations. But for some reason, we've allowed them to operate openly in the United States for decades. Real Clear World said this. Recently, the House Select Committee on the Competition with the Chinese Communist Party released a video highlighting the whirlwind of bipartisan accomplishments and groundbreaking investigations they've undertaken. The House Select Committee is doing a lot of very good work, overturning a lot of CCP subversion. Now it notes the CCP's decades-long political warfare. They have an entire military branch in China that focuses on political warfare against other countries. The CCP's decades-long political warfare upon the United States demanded a response, and the Select Committee met the moment, it says. And they note, it's curious then that more than 50 organizations publicly opposed Congress's reauthorization of the highly effective committee. They want to bring this committee back, right? New Congress, bring it back. There's 50 organizations saying, don't do it. This is discriminatory. It says this, though. Closer scrutiny reveals what unites many of the leading civil society organizations that oppose the Select Committee. And that is, it says, shared funding sources along with CCP ties and talking points. In other words, the CCP funds the organizations. They have set talking points, which we're seeing across the internet right now, whether it's these fake travel bloggers, YouTubers and TikTokers and people on Instagram getting paid by China to run propaganda. If you've seen these like drone shots being like, China's living in 2077 or something like that. It's paid propaganda. The CCP is doing it. And again, it's even a lot of it's fake, right? It's just doctored. The CCP is launching a massive political warfare campaign against the United States. And it turns out that they're kind of overplaying their hand right now. They're going after a House Select Committee using organizations that are tied in funding, that are tied with CCP organizations, and are tied with talking points and set narratives linking them to the Chinese Communist Party, and they claim that they're not linked to them. It notes this, quote, "The Asian Americans for Advancing Justice, AAAJ letter, leads with the race card, echoing the CCP's preferred talking points." It says the AAAJ accused the Select Committee in the House of Representatives of, quote, "perpetuating an adversarial framework and pouring fuel on existing racial animus." How could you evil racists dare investigate the Chinese Communist Party, right? That's what they're invoking. It says the letter mirrors an August 2023 op-ed published by a CCP mouthpiece claiming the committee, right, this government committee in the United States investigating the CCP, claiming the committee fuels racism and fosters anti-China and anti-Asian hate crimes. It notes for renewing the committee, the AAAJ claims would lead to discrimination and racial profiling and promote an adversarial framework. Now this piece goes on to counter that, and they say this, here's the reality. No organization on the globe leverages racial animosity quite like the CCP itself, nor does any organization so viciously target Asian Americans, especially the Chinese diaspora community. The CCP exports its human rights abuses, persecuting Falun Gong, persecuting Tibetan Buddhists, persecuting Muslim Uyghurs on American soil, and democracy activists. It notes the CCP deals in racist tropes, runs an ethno-state. Again, the Han Chinese are kind of the tool they use for ethnic genocide in China. And it notes it is conducting a genocide against Uyghurs, and they enslave them also. It says the Chinese people tragically are the CCP's first and greatest victims, both within China and in diaspora communities. At least 45 million Chinese starved during the Great Leap Forward famine. Another 1.5 to 2 million were killed or starved during the Cultural Revolution. Thousands were mowed down during the Tiananmen Square massacre, all of which the Chinese Communist Party tries to hide, by the way. And it says, the party state, CCP executes political prisoners by organ procurement for profit. It harvests their organs while they're still alive. It says today's Chinese citizen endures the most highly sophisticated surveillance state in world history. The CCP even exports its repressions to America's shores through systemic targeting of the Chinese diaspora. And it says in contrast, the Select Committee exposed the CCP's attacks upon Asian Americans to shield the Chinese diaspora from Beijing's long arm. The Select Committee publicized the CCP's overseas police service stations that harass ethnic Chinese targets on U.S. soil and highlighted CCP Chairman Xi Jinping's primary, quote, magic weapon. It's the United Front within America, the intelligence-adjacent United Front Work Department, which cultivates CCP allies. They basically build spies and get government employees and business leaders to work with them, and subvert CCP opponents within the United States, like their attacks on us here at the Epoch Times, by the way. Basically, they're saying, look, all these CCP front organizations trying to mess with the U.S. government right now, trying to say that the U.S. government is racist for investigating the CCP, they're saying it's the opposite. The Chinese Communist Party is the greatest abuser of the Chinese people, and the U.S. government, by exposing the CCP's abuses, is actually protecting the Chinese people from the greatest abuser of them, the Chinese Communist Party. Now, like the House committee, they also responded to the campaign on its official account on X as well. Here's what it wrote. They said, "We won't let CCP-funded groups stand in the way of our efforts to expose their mass genocide, racial animosity, and role in fueling America's fentanyl crisis." All of which, by the way, is done by CCP front groups right here on American soil. And they say this, like basically on the point of racial animosity and such, this is something the CCP is going to try to use. The way the CCP is running this campaign, where it's using front organizations, right, these human rights groups on American soil, fighting against the racism of the U.S. government that criticizes the Chinese Communist Party. This is actually a tactic of the CCP. It's actually interesting to see, CCP-backed organizations trying to use this to shut down a congressional committee that could actually investigate these very operations, because they're kind of exposing their hand right now. But the CCP, the technical strategy they're using with this, they have a slogan for it. The strategy of the CCP, it goes with the slogan, strangle you with your own systems. That's the method they're using through the mouthpieces in China. That's the method they're using through the front organizations in the United States attacking this congressional committee right now. Strangle you with your own systems. What does it mean in this particular context? What is America sensitive to? What is legally debatable in this country? What kind of operations could get a congressional committee shut down? Well, if they're racist, if they're engaging in racial discrimination, they might get shut down. In the United States, of course, again, under the Civil Rights Act, the government cannot engage in that type of, racial bias. They cannot discriminate against people based on race or religion and so on. And so if you have a congressional committee that's engaging in that, it can probably get shut down. The CCP, under its political warfare departments, which run under its military, by the way, and then work through the United Front, which will puppeteer these organizations, including many which seem to be targeting this. They puppeteer them, but the Chinese military will give them the narratives. They have entire organizations in China in their military that study the foreign laws of other countries. And so they'll study American constitutional law, they'll study state law, and they'll look to manipulate that law through the use of narratives. So what they'll very likely do is have these front organizations, Asians for Human Rights or something like that, fed information through these propaganda channels to form their narratives, and then they will use the narratives to trigger legal attacks, right? Lawfare. You call this the three warfare: psychological warfare, media warfare, legal warfare. The really interesting thing right now is that kind of works if you go after a few targets. The CCP is doing it to like everyone right now. They're doing it to Epoch Times. They're doing it to Shen Yun. The CCP is targeting us. They're doing it to U.S. Congress. The Chinese Communist Party is even openly threatening members of our government if they support, human rights issues in China. And they're now going after, the CCP is going after the House Select Committee, which focuses on investigating these very operations. How stupid could you get? This is what the CCP is doing. They are exposing their hand on a massive scale right now. And it's not working. The House Select Committee is openly exposing it, and they're very much aware of it. In other news, folks, as we see mass firings of government workers at the federal level, there are now concerns being raised over espionage in relation to these mass firings. I'll be talking about it after I come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges with a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold. You can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. There's a new espionage threat in the United States. You know what that is? It's disgruntled federal employees. Now look, as government employees are losing their jobs, one reason to be disgruntled, amid the recent cuts, and others may not agree with the policies being enacted, there's now risk of a growing threat of foreign espionage. AP said this: as President Donald Trump and his advisor Elon Musk work to overhaul the federal government, they're forcing out thousands, maybe more than that, of workers with insider knowledge and connections who now need a job. And maybe that job will be working as a spy for a foreign country, or an advisor, right? It says, for Russia, China, and other adversaries, the upheaval in Washington as Musk's Department of Government Efficiency guts government agencies presents an unprecedented opportunity to recruit informants, national security and intelligence experts say. Every former federal worker with knowledge of or existing access to sensitive information or systems could be a target. Maybe all of them will be targeted. And it says when thousands of them leave their jobs at the same time, that creates a lot of targets, as well as a counter-espionage challenge for the United States. Now, this is not just them blowing hot air. There was actually an official alert that came out along these lines as well. A few weeks ago, CNN said this, for example. It said foreign adversaries, including Russia and China, have recently directed their intelligence services to ramp up recruiting of U.S. federal employees working in national security, targeting those who have been fired or feel they could be soon, meaning they're still having their jobs, still in their positions, according to 4 people familiar with the recent U.S. intelligence on the issue and a document reviewed by CNN. There was a leaked report on this. Now, look, it could be argued that someone who could potentially turn into a spy would be an even greater threat if they still have their job, because it means you have a disgruntled employee who maintains access to whatever systems they have access to. And if they believe that, hey, they oppose the incumbent government and maybe they even have allegiance or think another one is better, they might just work with them. Now, keep in mind the way that espionage usually looks. It's not like you're, meeting in an alleyway and handing a suitcase to some guy in a trench coat. You know what I mean? It's usually not like that. The way espionage works is maybe a front organization, maybe a human rights organization, right? One of these Chinese organizations against discrimination will hire you as an advisor. It'll be something like that. Maybe a Chinese tech company will say, we think you have some great qualifications and we believe you should work for us. And you'll have an advisory job on this company. And then, you'll become friends with one of your coworkers and you'll start giving information to your coworker and maybe they'll start paying you. That's how people get roped into becoming spies, oftentimes without realizing what they're doing until it's too late. It could also be that you get, maybe you're an IT worker, right? You work on like IT systems, you manage the company's internet, you work on government cybersecurity. You're sitting at your desk looking at your anime figures on your shelf, and suddenly a beautiful Chinese woman comes and sits at a coffee table with you and says, wow, my boyfriend stood me up. This is it. I'm done with him. What are you doing tonight? And all of a sudden, that guy will tip his fedora hat and be like, well, whatever you want. You know what I mean? That's how espionage happens. This is used on a massive scale when they want to target an organization. You'll even have Chinese spies. What do, right? They'll jump on LinkedIn. They'll type in, what organization do I want to subvert today? They'll type in that organization, and every single person who works there is going to have their current or former employment status. And you can find people who recently said that they ended their employment there, and you can just go target them. It's on LinkedIn. A lot of spy organizations use it. Now, what's different this time with these, big operations is the alleged active campaign to find and compromise people like this. This is a spy organization's dream come true, the situation being created right now. It's the perfect storm for espionage. If you go by American and Western definitions of the motivations for espionage, why would a person become a spy? And this is like the knowing side, not the guy who gets roped into it over the course of time. They'd say it's under the acronym MICE, M-I-C-E, money, ideology, coercion, or ego. You do it because you're short of cash. You just lost your job, or you're greedy, and they offer you money and you take it. A lot of people take that. Ideology. You're ideologically opposed to your current employer or your current, government, and you just because of ideology reasons you want to undermine them. That's another motivation which will be targeted by foreign spies. The other is coercion. Maybe you're blackmailed. Maybe you go on vacation in Saipan and you visit a brothel, and it turns out there were video cameras everywhere in that brothel, and now you're blackmailed. Maybe you go to China and they slip some magic mushrooms into your drink, which happened to a U.S. official recently, by the way, and then you do some dumb things. Maybe they videotape it, and then you're blackmailed. They will coerce you. They will threaten you. They'll threaten your family. This happens to a lot of people in the United States. Then there's also ego. You want to be James Bond. You think it looks cool and then you do it. Those are the things that will cause people to become spies by Western analysis. China has additional ones, the Chinese Communist Party. They use a devil's, kind of method, right? They look at moral flaws, lust, money, power, right? This kind of thing. If they want to, they'll take advantage of your moral flaws. Everybody has a moral flaw of some kind. And everybody has a limit of what they can endure when it comes to morality. Everybody, some people might not take $100 laying on a table. Some people might not take $1 million laying on a table. Some people might not take a bit more than that. But most people will have a limit of, what will financially motivate them. They'll find that moral limit. Some people can resist to an extent certain temptations. Most people have a limit, and the CCP will take advantage of that limit in order to coerce you and then turn you into a spy. That's how their espionage works, and they aggressively do this against business leaders, journalists, government employees, and others. Anybody who works in who leads what they call the civil society, they will try to target using these methods. And once they get you working as a spy, they have the saying, when riding a tiger, it's hard to dismount. Once they got you roped in, you're tied up and you can't get out of it. And then you find that all those wonderful things are not what they appeared to be, and you have no way out. That's what they're doing aggressively right now as we speak. And of course, it's being investigated. So that said, folks, let's jump into some questions. Hit the like button, leave a question. Let's jump into it. Went a bit longer today, but let's see. Ashley from California, you're saying, I hear there's a lot going on in the Chinese economy. Xi Jinping, is not happy with what's happening with the Panama Canal. And it's wild to see the living conditions of millions of their citizens. They just hide their homeless better than we do. Yeah, which is also why I'd say that you're seeing a lot of this propaganda right now. I would say the reason the CCP is paying YouTubers to run, travel propaganda, and you have these useful idiots going to China. They're being paid by the CCP. They're getting put up in like 5-star hotels. They're living in the Truman Show. You ever see that movie with Jim Carrey, The Truman Show? They're living in the Truman Show. It's the same thing the Soviets did during the Cold War. You had these useful idiots going on, journalists and so on, going on paid trips to the Soviet Union. And you have these they were KGB propagandists, but this is your tour guide, friendly Comrade Yuri, right? Comrade Bill, and they take you on these propaganda tours. Here is the factory that generates 400% capacity of what your petty American factories generate. Ha, stupid Americans. This is a great playground for children. Behold this wedding. Turns out they're all actors. That happened very heavily during the Cold War. They would fake numbers. They would fake economic, output. They would fake factories. They'd have actors doing fake weddings, and they'd show them to these wonderful, useful idiot journalists who went there and just said everything that was fed to them. They would do that kind of stuff, and they would be like, no, there are no gulags. This is American capitalist propaganda because they don't want you having our wonderful system. Turns out there were gulags, and they were like torturing people worse than the Inquisition in Europe, right? They were doing worse things than that, but they were covering it up. These useful idiot journalists would come to the U.S., they'd write articles on it, and they'd propagandize Americans. You had a lot of people who believed a lot of this stuff. It turned out it was all fake. It was a Potemkin village, as you call it. The same thing is happening right now as we speak with the Chinese Communist Party. They're inviting YouTubers and TikTokers and Instagram people. They're paying them like $300 or $200 to run CCP propaganda. Tim Pool actually came out publicly and had a video where he said that some organization tried paying him $200 to run propaganda against Falun Gong, right, which the CCP's persecuting. He refused, and then he exposed it. They tried paying him $200. A lot of these useful idiots These YouTubers and TikTokers, they're doing it. They're taking the money. And so you're seeing a lot of this propaganda right now. You're seeing a lot of that propaganda right now. The question is, why are they doing it? Why are they doing it? Well, it's because they don't want people to understand the real state of China right now. As Ashley from California notes, the Chinese economy is really not doing well right now. Gordon Cheng came out recently, and he suggested there's about a 9% deficit beyond the GDP in China. That means economic destruction. That means that they're like this, and they're still falling. That means their economy is collapsing, right? They're really not doing well right now. Even prior to Trump's tariffs and the trade war you're now watching unfold, even prior to these moves to pull manufacturing out of China, which is a huge part of their economy, even outside of all of that, even in addition to the tariffs on other countries which are affecting them by extension, Russia, Venezuela, think about that, Iran now as well, tariffs that have ripple effects through China, even in addition to all of that, they already had a liquidity crisis, they already had a real estate crisis, they were already facing the lie flat movement of young Chinese just saying, I'm not going to do anything, and I'm going to collapse the CCP just by watching TV all day long and nothing else. They were also facing an economic crisis, even just from their rolling lockdowns. The Chinese economy was already collapsing even without these outside factors. The situation there is dire. It is in free fall collapse. And so they're running these propaganda campaigns trying to tell people otherwise. And why are they doing it? It's because they want foreign investment. They need foreign investment. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The Chinese Communist Party is propped up by foreign money. It is propped up by foreign business, manufacturing. It is propped up by foreign investment. And it's also propped up by bad trade deals, which give them major trade imbalances. The trade imbalances are being dealt with right now. The investors, they're a whole other issue, because you do have a lot of investment firms that just pour money into China. And so the CCP is trying to counter that, because ideology and perception are what brings the money in. They have to control that in order to bring the money back in. That's the information war you see happening right now. Kenneth Harris, you're saying, having been military and being part of the projection of power during my lifetime, you're saying, so how have we forgotten the purpose of the military is not only defense of the Constitution, but also of our actual borders? Shut down the CCP's opium war. Yeah. You're talking about American projection of power, right? When we think about military, we think about it as external security. The military is projecting power. This is American strength, the Pax Americana. We are basically securing the world under the banner of the Constitution, which we do, right? The American idea is largely supported by this. And American strength is largely actually supported by the fact that there's a cost benefit and loss analysis here. When we talk about the fact that America bankrolls a lot of the defense of other countries, that has its positive. When we have military bases in Germany and in Canada and Greenland and everywhere else, you could argue that we basically pay for the defense of a lot of these regions. We're basically subsidizing their defense. They don't have to field their own militaries as much, right? But what we get out of that is they will oftentimes pay for the bases of our troops. It lowers the cost of our deployments. Americans, we still have to pay for the wages of our troops, and we do share some of those costs, but not all of it. Now you could argue what this has done is made the United States the global Roman legion. The stretches of Rome have now encompassed the globe. We're a very powerful military force because we're able to field such a massive military, and also because a lot of countries don't bother to field massive militaries because we effectively provide it for them. What happens if we pull that back? Other countries have to bolster their militaries. They become militarily more powerful. We're no longer the biggest kid on the block. Maybe we still are, but there are some pretty strong kids in the block as well. You could argue that, there is an argument for us basically subsidizing defense for other countries. There is an argument for it. It gives us a monopoly on it. Now, presumably we're not going to be getting rid of our military power, but we are making other countries strengthen theirs. The problem we've had largely is that U.S. adversaries, they have not weakened their militaries. Iran basically uses most of its money for its military. China uses it, even though their economy is hurting, they're not cutting their military budgets. Their military is still very much a huge focus, and they're very aggressive with it. Russia for a long time was doing that. We found out a lot of it was smoke and mirrors because they didn't do so well in Ukraine. And so you could argue that there's two sides to it. It's actually good if our allies have stronger militaries because we can fight these other powers more easily if we have some friends. You could also argue that we're losing some of our ability to project power if other countries don't need it. If Europe doesn't need it, if Canada doesn't need the strength of the U.S. military, right? It's not good for our monopoly on it. You could argue this, but back to Kenneth's point, we're not just focused on projection of power. There's also internal security. And one of the original responsibilities of the federal government, if you go back prior to even like the Civil War, when the states had a lot more rights when it came to the way they just do whatever they want, let's say, including things that we might not want them to do, like slavery. When it was back in those times, the federal government, much smaller, states and state government much, much more powerful. The Continental Army, the focus of the federal government, they were focused on foreign diplomacy, right? The U.S. federal government, foreign diplomacy, foreign trade, tariffs, that kind of thing, and border security, securing the country's borders. These were some of the basic responsibilities of the federal government. Foreign trade, diplomacy, wars if we have to get into them, and border security. When Texas, under the Biden administration, when Texas declared that the federal government was basically delinquent on securing the border and began putting up barbed wire fence, constant turn of wire and that kind of stuff, putting up those buoys in the Rio Grande, which was very controversial, and the federal government ordered those to be torn down. They started tearing down the wire. They started taking the buoys out. There erupted a legal battle between Texas and the federal government. And the legal battle basically was on the grounds of saying, well, the federal government was arguing border security is the responsibility of the federal government, not of a state. If you go by the Constitution, that's true. If you go by original law, that is true. Texas had to argue the federal government was delinquent on that, and so because of their ability to have domestic security, they had to do it themselves. And that was the legal battle. Now, agree or disagree with whichever side you want on that, but it does go back to where we are now, that yes, border security is one of the focuses of the federal government. And when you see Donald Trump now deploying a Navy destroyer to work on border security, something that we would not normally think would be used for border security. Technically, that is within the bounds of the federal government's responsibility. Now, normally you wouldn't need guns that big. Those are some big guns for little human traffickers, right? Maybe they're not really set up to carry out deportations and so on, but they are set up for radar, for security, for arrests, carrying if they have to go capture a ship or something like that. They do have the capabilities for that. And they'll work with the Coast Guard, they'll work with other smaller ships to carry out those operations. The other wild card is if they do move forward with targeted strikes on cartel sites or targeted raids on cartel sites. Special operations forces oftentimes do operate out of these very advanced warships, including some of those Aegis ones. I actually got a tour by an admiral, a personal tour of one of those ships. It was incredible. It was, don't get me wrong, it was legal. But I got a personal tour of one of those ships one time. It was incredible. They even have like special operations command centers on some of those ships, and so those ships, even though they're like destroyers, they'll have operations to run special operations forces. And so when you have these targeted raids against cartel sites, now they've been designated as terrorist organizations, they could operate off those ships as well, which I half wonder if they're doing, but they're not going to tell us probably unless we really got to know about it, which I assume they're not going to tell us until they feel like it, right? But we are seeing some arrests taking place of some of those cartel heads and so on, so maybe. Last question, folks. See more butts. You're saying Homan, as in Borders are Tom Homan. Homan said that we should expect an uptick in violence from the cartels in response to us taking their revenue sources. That is true. I have a lot of family in San Diego, right at the border, and I do hear stories, and I have friends and family in law enforcement and military. I do hear stories of some of the violence. Good friend of mine, Oscar Ramirez. He's a journalist in Mexico. He and I were both in the Darien Gap at the mouth of it together. He's gone through the Darien Gap. I have not. I was just at the mouth of it. He's been making a lot of reports about cartel activity on the Mexico side of the border. There's a big controversy in Mexico right now over allegations of what they call extermination camps. Maybe we need to do something on this. In Mexico, there's a big controversy right now that the cartels were running extermination camps. They were taking people to these camps and killing them. That they have mass graves on the Mexico side of the border. There's a lot of controversy in Mexico over this. And also that the cartels have put out kill-on-sight orders for American personnel. There was a recent incident, just I believe over the weekend or late last week, where there were U.S. agents who were killed in a firefight with some of these cartels. And so, yeah, you're already seeing it. You are already seeing this happen. And so it's kind of a dumb move for the cartels because that's going to legitimize a U.S. response. A U.S. response, let's call it. Which is normally why the cartels don't target Americans, even ones engaged in crime, by the way. This is normally why the cartels do not target Americans and do not ever target American agents, because they will be backslapped. They will be backhanded right back down to where they came from. And the great backhand of the United States is about to drop, I would say. So get ready for it, folks. That said, all right, folks, it's getting late. Join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Again, I'll see you tomorrow right here, same time as always. That said, please share this video. Give us a like. Helps us quite a bit. As always, folks, thank you so much for being here. Please take care of yourselves. And as always, again, stay informed and stay free. Thank you.